All right, it's time again for the SMC Journal podcast. This is our show that's all about software engineering and IT today, and we cover a myriad of topics that includes testing, tuning, observability, security, AI, infrastructure, cloud, and much, much more. I'm Scott Moore, your host. Thank you so much for being with me today. So recently, I asked the community on YouTube, what would you like to see more of on this channel? Do you want to see me do more deep dives into more technical topics? Do you want to see more funny stuff, like when I do the parody songs and things like that? Or do you want like news or cutting edge about AI, subject matter that's more cutting edge? Or would you like to hear something like war stories, learning from the past? I was very surprised at the results of that poll. Over 70% of you said you would like to hear war stories. I just thought that was not what I expected. But I'm glad, because guess what? I like to tell war stories. And I'm going to tell a story today to get us started. We'll see how this goes. And if you like it, we'll do more war stories, because I've got plenty of those in my 30 plus years software engineering experience. So if this is the kind of thing that you would like to see on a regular basis, keep giving me feedback. One way that you can give me feedback is to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and ring the bell so you'll be notified of all the latest episodes as they come out, or all the videos that come out on my channel. That really helps me out a lot. How did I actually get into this? How did I become a performance engineer? So my story begins around 1997 or so. So we're talking a long time ago. I was living in North Florida, and I was wanting to make the move to a new city, and I wanted to move to Nashville, Tennessee, because I've always loved music. And I was in IT at the time. I was I was a manager of a support center. So that's where I started my IT career. Now I wanted to move to Nashville, Tennessee. I thought I was going to leave IT. I figured temporarily I'd work at a company that maybe could utilize my current skill sets. But then I eventually wanted to get into making music, being a producer, working in recording studios. That was always my dream. And I realized later, fast forward when I got to Nashville, that dream wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and I deviated away from that, and I'm glad that I did. It was a good decision. Still love music, and I actually still make music and produce music, but it's not what I do for a living. Let's go to the move to Nashville. I made a bunch of resumes up. I started submitting resumes, and this was when the internet was brand new. So we were still talking about sending resumes through a fax machine at that point, and I had about once I had about 3 job interviews lined up in Nashville, I decided to take a trip up there and do all 3 interviews. Maybe it was 4 interviews within a day or a day and a half. So I only spent like maybe 2 days, 48 hours in Nashville. But I walked away with a job, and my first job was in Nashville was at Deloitte and Touche. So one of the big 5 consulting firms at the time. They did accounting, auditing, those type of things. And I still stayed in the support realm. But as I remained with the company, did a good job, I saw other opportunities internally that I wanted to go into. And one of those was in an application that I had been supporting, and this was on the development side of the application. And I thought maybe I would try my hand at being a junior developer and moving into that realm. Got on that team, and I realized that wasn't really what I wanted to do. I became part of an implementation team working on configuration. So I was working with the developers, but sort of in the outskirts of that. And then one day, somebody came up to me and said, "Scott, we need some help in the realm of testing, and specifically performance testing. And we have spent a lot of money on a license for a product." And they said, "We got this machine over in the corner. And it's called LoadRunner. We don't know how to use it, but we've got some consultants who are helping us go through a big load test right now. We want to train you, and we want you to be the internal person that learns how to do this." Well, I'm up for the challenge. I'm ready to do it. And my boss at the time, she said, I'm going to send you to training in a week or so. We're trying to line that up for you. We want you to be empowered with this knowledge. We're not just going to throw you out there. But in the meantime, we want you to study up on your own Start reading up documentation. Make sure you understand the software as much as you can before you go to training, and talk to those consultants that we have that are using this software now and see if they can give you some tips or some tricks just to get you started. Did exactly what my boss told me to do. Placed a call to the consultant, and at that time, I believe they were a consultant for IBM, and the person's name was Scott. I'll never forget it. And our conversation was, "Hey, I was told to call you. I need to learn this tool. They're going to be sending me to training. Is there anything I could be doing to get set up to start doing this?" I'll never forget the response. It wasn't what I expected. The person said, "Scott, I don't really know you, but I don't want to put a glass ceiling on you, buddy." That was his quote. "I don't want to put a glass ceiling on you, buddy. But this is not something I don't think somebody that's with your years of experience in IT or your background, you're going to be able to pick up very easily. And it's going to take you years before you're able to figure out, what to do here. Why don't you just leave it to the experts, to us? We'll take care of you. And maybe one day you can do this, but I wouldn't bet on it." At that moment, something clicked in me. And I said, "Okay, from this point forward," and I said this to him, I said, "From this day forward, this will be the mission in my life, is to learn this software and be better at it than you the next time that we talk." And that launched me into a career in performance engineering. I did not have a focus until then, but what brought me to performance engineering was spite. Now, after this conversation, I felt offended, and I went back to my boss and told her what had happened. And she said, "Scott, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. They're just upset because we're going to end the contract with them." And then she told me how much they were paying them by the hour, by the week. And that's when I really got interested in being a performance engineer, because I thought, wow, that's way more money per hour than I'm making as an employee here. Maybe one day I'll be a consultant and I can make that kind of money. And actually, I don't think I ever made as much as they did, because back then that was a very niche skill set and it demanded a pretty high price. There weren't very many load runner consultants at the time. But I said to myself, man, if you could just get there, you would need to work but about an hour or two a week, and then you'd be able to lay off and make music all day and play the guitar. I sat down with one of the other employees and consultants who were working near me, who had dabbled in Load Runner, and they were showing me version, I believe it was 4.5, and they were actually running a load test against a client server with a database on the back end. This wasn't even web. This was before testing websites at this particular time. That was the first thing I learned. And I was used to using Linux and command line terminal, not a problem, knew all the commands, knew how to write shell script, and I could do things in a lot of things in Windows and administration. And I think I had already achieved my Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer, MCSE. That was a big deal back in the late 90s. And so I felt like I had some baseline experience understanding this, but then I started seeing all the ANSI C code and seeing all the database tables roll into the scripting tool, and how many settings there actually was for this. And my eyes kind of started rolling to the back of my head. I'm like, oh boy, what have I jumped into? But I gave myself a little bit of grace and a little bit of time. And fortunately, I did have the support of some of my own colleagues there in Deloitte, which I'm still appreciative of this day. I probably took the Load Runner class maybe 3 times, because I always skipped over the part for the planning, because to me that was boring. I wanted to get to the scripting. I wanted to write code. I wanted to make it do stuff. I wanted to kill the system, not realizing that beginning portion, those first few chapters of the training, was about the context. And that was the most important. Like, how do you build a load test that's the perfect storm, the perfect scenario that could really happen in production? How do you know what questions to ask? That was really the start of when I realized that was the important part, going back through the class again, getting all of that together in a way that was, I guess, organized in my head. That helped me to become a better performance engineering consultant, because every client's different. You've got to ask questions in a way where you can get the information fast and put together the requirements for a load test to give the client what they actually want, not what they necessarily say they want, but being able to ask leading questions that get you to a place where you actually know what they really need to get out of the test to bring value, to make a business decision. So it was very helpful. It wasn't long after putting LoadRunner on my resume, after knowing it for about six or 8 months, that I was recruited. Remember Monster.com and how big of a site that was? I think within one day of putting the word LoadRunner on my profile, I was recruited by 3 different companies. One of them, particularly in Tampa, Florida, was called Commerce Quest, and they were a company that had built a web front end to some AS400 applications, and they were testing that integration. That's what Commerce Quest did, was enable web applications for applications that weren't made for the web originally, and putting that front end and making them work. And so then we could test those with the web virtual users that were in LoadRunner at that point. They decided to create a whole consulting arm. Started out with about a dozen people. I might have been number 12, maybe number 14 on the team, that just did nothing but Mercury products: LoadRunner, Test Director, WindRunner. We were part of that initial startup team. And even though this company, Commerce Quest, wasn't necessarily a consulting company for testing, there were some initial hires that were amazing. And they did all of those early SAP projects, very large Oracle implementations, things like that. And they knew code as well. They could write ANSI C code. It would drip off their fingers. Like they could just hold it, and it was just wonderful C code that never even needed to be debugged. It was those folks. And you don't hear about them because they were not people who wanted to have big mouths like me and be out in the front in the spotlight and things like that. They just wanted to go in and do a good job for a project. But those were some of the best days for me when I started learning from them. So I didn't just pick all of this stuff up because I read some book or I just started messing around with a tool. I had built a network of people on this team, and I had gone through a certification test that was pretty rigorous. When you took the LoadRunner exam and became a CPC, and initially when you became a CPI, a certified instructor, that was a technical certification, and then it became less technical later on. But the original CPC and CPI, you had to know how to do everything in LoadRunner, troubleshoot LoadRunner, troubleshoot the lab, know everything that could go wrong. They would sabotage the lab. It was all hands-on. It wasn't book learning. It wasn't necessarily multiple choice. The answers were free form. You had an exam that was open book, and you had 30 days to take the exam. But the person who reviewed that exam was a practitioner who knew their stuff. It was these same people that I'm telling you about. You can't fool them, and they're going to know if you're duplicating your answer from somebody else. So that's the way that we all learned. There was probably a 90% fail rate back then for those exams. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a great thing. I mean, overall, that a lot of people were failing, but you had to know your stuff. There initially was 2 certifications for the CPC in LoadRunner. One of them was for web specifically, and one of them was for the database virtual user, the original one that I had started on. And that exam, I actually failed that exam the first time that I took it. And that humbled me because I thought, I've got this stuff. I've now got so many years of experience and so many gigs under my belt. I had to go back and redo that exam to get through it. You had to pass those before you could become the certified instructor. And I remember going to Sunnyvale and taking that exam. And it was just as technical as it was your instructor skills, like being able to actually present in front of people. But all of that really helped me become the performance engineer, the consultant performance engineer that I did become. And because I am a little bit of a ham, because I love to share information, I love to teach, I love to get in front of people, one of the first things I did during that era was I created a site. I bought a domain called loadtester.com. And I started that initially as a board, a forum that people could go into, and we could start asking questions. We could share LoadRunner code. And it didn't just have to be about one vendor. Like, it didn't have to be about LoadRunner. It could be about any tool that was out there. But back then, that was really the big tool. There were very few competitors at the time. So that is how I met quite a few people in the industry, was through that board. SQA Forums was another board where everybody would talk on the internet about this kind of stuff. And I believe Yahoo had a chat forum as well. That was what started my whole path to being a performance engineer. It wasn't the path that I initially had selected, but once I got the focus and realized how much value I was providing to customers, it became very satisfying to me. I've always felt that IT was one of those things where it's a sandcastle type of situation. You're building these sandcastles, these websites, these applications, and maybe you not only build the sandcastle, you spray paint it with colors, and you're like those artists that do that on the beach. But what happens eventually is the tide comes in and rolls it away, and you end up having to build a new sandcastle in its place, the new version, the fixing all the defects and going into a whole new UI, and everything needs to be updated because everything's changing in IT. And that aspect of constant change, after you've tested all of this and it's this well-oiled machine, then you kick it down and start all over again. That was really tough for me because, again, let's go back to the music scenario. I'm still listening to bands from the 60s and the 70s that I still love to listen to those songs today. They made those songs and recorded them one time, released them, and we're still all enjoying them. You crank up some Led Zeppelin and you listen to John Bonham on the drums. Are you kidding me? But it's something that they made and it doesn't go away. It can be consumed over and over again. And software in those terms isn't that way. So the creative side of me had to somehow kick in and say, if I want to be in IT, how can I stay sane when we're kicking down these sandcastles? And to me, testing it and at least making it better before a user gets to it, making a delightful end user experience, that was what it was about for me, making it the best that it can be, the best quality that it can be, the best performance it can be, most efficient that it can be, lowering the risk, saving companies money, making them more money in the long run because they did it right the first time. Those were very satisfying things for me. And so the other thing about me is I'm very task oriented and I like to create templates for everything that I do. So if I find a way that works, I pretty much stick to it until there's a need for change because something else has caused me to have to deviate from this path, or I'm always looking for a better way to do it. But if I can find the perfect template, even if it's not for very long, I'm going to use that template over and over again, and then I'm going to want to share that with everybody I know because if it's helped me, I want it to help you. That's what really started me beyond loadtester.com, sharing blog articles, taking the code that I had learned at various engagements for clients and stripping out the stuff from my trip reports, stripping out client information, making it anonymous, but sharing that on loadtester.com. And then eventually I started my own company and I brought on a few of my friends to do the exact same thing. And it was just basically cloning that culture and that method of doing things. Later on, we merged with another company and called ourselves Northway Solutions Group. And we broadened the scope of what we did, but we still were known as the people that you called whenever you had performance issues and you needed something fixed. And it was not necessarily about a specific tool, it was about the process that we had built. And it was very repeatable and it was very successful. And of course, again, things changed. We went from client server to web-based applications. Now we're at container-based applications, Kubernetes, microservices. We've gone from, we've swung the pendulum from client server and mainframe and stuff to completely distributed components. And now we're starting to see the pendulum swing back because now we've got edge computing versus cloud computing, which is kind of like I see a big parallel there. So as you're in IT for a long period of time, you start seeing these patterns, but I'm a template guy as much as I can be and as much as I can stick to it. And that's why I like to share that stuff with you. There's a lot of minefields that you may have to go through to find your career path. And if performance engineering is one of those things that you found, those things that were really important to me in the beginning were having the support of team members, having somebody that was an instructor and a mentor, and building a group of friends that I would call a community that we could rely on each other. I think that's the secret to this and being successful to it. And I think that could happen for any job or career choice or industry. I think that's the way it should be working. And your network, your people network, and the knowledge that they have is extremely valuable. And the one thing I would, if you didn't listen to anything else I said, the thing I think is the most valuable for this is it's about who you know and who you keep in touch with, why you keep in touch with them, and making your network extremely important. Contact people even when you don't need something from them, so they know that you care about them first, so that when you do need something, they're always ready to help you because they know if they needed something, you would help them as well. So I don't know, maybe the takeaway from this is look at your list of people, look at the people who are most valuable to your network for your career, and maybe just call them up and tell them how much you appreciate the help they've given to you before. Take them out and get some coffee or something and have a conversation and tell them that you want to stay in touch just to stay in touch. It's really, really important to do that. I try to do that as often as I can, even to people who ghost me, even people who only call me when they need something from me. So I don't know. This is my first war story. What do you think about it? Is this the kind of thing you were thinking about when you answered the questionnaire that you wanted to see more? I'd like to hear your feedback. You can find me on social media. Most of you know how to find me on LinkedIn. I'm usually pretty active out there, or you know that you can send me an email at heyscott@smcjournal.com. Love to hear what you think about that. Once more, if you wouldn't mind, subscribe to the channel. And like this video and let YouTube know that my content is worth watching. I would really appreciate it. That helps me out so much. And give me some ideas about additional war stories. If not by me, who would you like to hear a war story from? Take that in consideration and maybe we'll put a show about it. So thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next SMC Journal podcast.